Alright, so those of you who have been subscribed to us for quite some time now are probably thinking to yourselves, wait, haven't you guys discussed Telltale Games already? To which the answer is yes. Yes, we did. And while it's certainly unusual for us to revisit a topic that we had previously closed the book on, it's certainly not unheard of. Especially if either one or even both of us have developed a new perspective of sorts on the subject matter since the last time we discussed it. So Telltale Games. Last time we talked about them, I think it's fair to say that both of us were more or less on the same page about them being master storytellers, but
Sure.
I think last time the two of us were sort of on the opposite ends of the spectrum as far as how much veracity there is to their claim that all the decisions and all the choices you make in their quote-unquote interactive stories have an actual impact on the ending of said stories.
Yep.
You want to elaborate on that, Matthew?
Well, I was on the end of this conversation that the majority of what you do in the game has no bearing, or very little bearing, depending on the game, to the ending. For instance, the Walking Dead series has always been very good as far as you get to choose your own options and certain things happen. However, even there, in those cases, you are going to reconverge at a certain spot. So let's say you do kick out this one woman who shot one of the people in your party. Well, fine and dandy. And then let's say you decide to instead spare her on your second playthrough and bring her along. Well, of course, the narrative needs to keep moving forward in a certain path, so what happens is she hijacks your car and drives off.
Yes, and in response to all of that, last time my main arguments were something along the lines of Telltale has sort of managed to amass this impressive body of work of theirs by creating story-driven games based on already existing properties, such as you said, The Walking Dead, The Wolf Among Us, which is based on the Fables comic, and as of recently, Tales from the Borderlands, which is of course based on the Borderlands series, Game of Thrones, which is based on the TV show and the book series of the same name, and so on and so forth. So one thing that we have talked about previously, but I think it bears repeating this time around, is that when you're creating a story based in an already established continuity, there are certain constraints that you cannot get around. For example, in episode 1 of... we talked about this last time, but in episode 1 of Walking Dead Season 1, you end up on the farm of Herschel Green, who is a major character in both the TV show and the comic book version of The Walking Dead. And you mentioned how, regardless of what you do, whether or not you try to save his son, at the end you end up leaving his farm either way. And I said, well, the reason for that is because, like I said, Herschel is a major character, or rather, Herschel's farm is a major location, both the TV show and the comic book. And by the time Rick Grimes and his group get to the farm, both Lee and Clementine, as well as Kenny and his family, are nowhere to be seen on the farm. So if they were to stay on the farm, that would have created a massive paradox of some sort. So there's no way around that. And like I said last time, this could be fixed by Telltale either creating a new property, and a new intellectual property of their own, or creating a story that perhaps is not a spin-off or a prequel, that basically is not tied as much to an already established continuity. But the problem is, they have made a game like that. It's called Tales from the Borderlands, which technically is a sequel to Borderlands 2, as well as the rest of the Borderlands series at large. And I think between the two of us, you are more well acquainted with the Borderlands series. Personally, I couldn't give a shit about it.
which is why specifically I bought you this Telltale game, because I was like, oh, this is one Max probably never buy.
That, or you were hoping that I would, reject it because it's Borderlands and you'd get your money back. But it would still count as a gift because, well, it's the thought that counts, Max, right?
Yeah, you're thinking the same thing when you gifted me the Game of Thrones one. All of a sudden one day you're like, hey, how's Game of Thrones treating you? I'm like, what? And you're like, I gifted you Game of Thrones. I'm like, I didn't see it. And then you look back, I look inside Steam and it's like, oh, shit. Oh.
stop revealing the details of our, I don't even want to use the word, but bromance.
I was gonna say the same fucking thing, you asshole. No, this is the you scratch my back, I jerk you off mentality of CCS. Joking. But no, the reason why we did that is because Max and I are just Telltale game fans, and if we find something that we like, we probably don't think the other one would like, we usually end up trying to encourage the other one to play it. So,
which is why we're having this conversation right now, is because after having played both Game of Thrones and Tales from the Borderlands, I am slowly but steadily starting to see LaughingMan's point of view, or at least the point of view that he expressed during the last After Hours that we dedicated to Telltale Games, because while personally I have no major complaints about Game of Thrones, in the case of Borderlands, again, a brief summary, prior to Telltale's game, I had no interest in Borderlands, so I came into this game as a complete newcomer, didn't really have any major expectations, but I ended up liking it for the most part, especially the first 2 or 3 episodes. It was a really well-crafted story. The humor was a notch above what I was expecting because of what I had heard previously about Borderlands.
Yeah, it was generally good.
And how most of the humor seems to be comprised either of pop culture references or, God help us all, internet memes. Like in Borderlands 2, you actually see the actual troll face. As well as some guard going, "Oh, I used to be a Vault Hunter, but then I got an arrow in the knee. Get it? Skyrim. It's funny, right?"
No.
But anyway, so I actually ended up, again, the story itself is great, but the problem is Telltale's claim that this game is custom tailored to the way you play, and that all the decisions you make actually have an impact on the story.
Very dubious in this case.
Not this time around. I could argue with you about, say, The Wolf Among Us, or the 2 seasons of The Walking Dead, or even Game of Thrones, but in the case of Borderlands, it just kind of slapped me across the face. I just realized that, it doesn't really matter how I play the game. I'm still gonna end up with the ending that Telltale had, made up for all the players, regardless of which style of not even gameplay, I guess, of interaction with other characters you choose.
Yep, and I'd like to say first of all that I'm winning, but yeah, I can definitely. Max is starting to kind of see where my POV was from our first recording, and honestly, it hasn't really improved all that much on my end. There's definitely instances of certain games like Wolf Among Us and especially like The Walking Dead where your decisions do have some ultimate consequence. But there's also instances of Telltale Games being shoehorned into these certain, outcomes.
Yeah.
Let's take the last. And this is going to be a pretty spoiler heavy recording. So yeah. Just like last time, if you haven't played the games, then you might want to just leave. Like the video first, but leave. Anyways, here we go. The ending of The Walking Dead Season 2, there's 9 different endings?
Yeah, there are 3 main endings, and
Right.
each one of those has, at the very least 2 or 3 variations of it. So, yeah, something like 8 or 9 endings overall.
So, in this case, you do have different endings, but that also put Telltale Games into a massive corner.
Quagmire, yes.
Yeah, well, basically put them up against the wall when it came to Season 3 of The Walking Dead. Because if the girl were to start off Season 3, then which of these openers do you start Season 3 with? Do you start with her being with Kenny, or with a short-haired chick, or being alone with the baby? And then if you say you took Kenny's route, do you start the game inside the compound that you left Kenny to join, or do you continue on with Kenny? They basically corner themselves with all these different options, and that is why I think Telltale Games, they're making that 3 episodic series starring a completely different character. one of the most popular fan characters, which I can't remember her name, to be honest. I suck at names.
It's Michonne.
Michonne. Okay, yeah, that...
Yeah, and to be fair, there is gonna be a Season 3 of Walking Dead, the video game.
Okay.
And Telltale has gone on record saying that they're gonna unveil more details about that once the Michonne miniseries is complete. But to go back to what you said about the potential beginning of Season 3, personally, I don't think Season 3 is going to start Clementine again, because if you think about it, her story is more or less complete by the ending of Season 2.
Yeah.
Or at the very least, all the themes and motives that Telltale tried to explore in Season 2 with her character. Mm-hmm. Do you give other people, a chance and try to build a stronger community? You scratch my back, I scratch yours, we look out after each other and whatnot, or do you become a self-reliant lone wolf of some sort? Now, we had talked about this prior to hitting the record button, but if Telltale were true to their word that all the decisions you make, they absolutely matter, every single one of them, and based on the decisions you make in one season, they're gonna have an effect on the next season. Basically, what I'm trying to say is, if Telltale do make Season 3 of The Walking Dead and it's gonna start Clementine, then ideally you should have 3 very different storylines, at the very least for the very first episode of the game, which are based on the ending you received in Season 2 of The Walking Dead. But what both of us are afraid of is that that's not going to happen, and if Telltale decides to continue the story of Clementine, what's basically going to happen is that regardless of what you did in Season 2, it's going to start in the very same place, and then there's just going to be a line or two of dialogue that basically explains that, well, yeah, at the end of Season 2, I decided to go with Kenny, and we found ourselves in this refugee camp, but then the camp got attacked by zombies, Kenny died trying to defend me, and so here I am. Or if you chose to go with the short-haired chick, I forget her name, whatever, it's gonna be a similar situation. Yeah, we tried to start our own camp, but it got attacked by zombies, she died while trying to save me, so here I am yet again. Or if you decided to go your own way, that is the third ending of Season 2. Yeah, I kind of tried to survive on my own, but, I got surrounded by zombies, the little kid got killed, so, again, for the third time in a row, here I am, none of what you do mattered, it's all destiny, it's all predetermined, woo.
They wipe the slate clean every single time.
Yeah, because they just don't know how to write themselves out of a corner. Basically, a comparison I made earlier, it's kind of like if, what the fuck is their name? BioWare decided to make a direct sequel to Mass Effect 3, Mass Effect 4, which basically kind of just completely ignores the ending of Mass Effect 3.
Yeah. Oh, Shepard, you're back. Well, it sounds like almost like a South Park episode where, oh yeah, Kenny died last episode, but he's back. Inexplicably.
Yeah, somehow.
But yeah, I certainly see where you're going, because I've always held the kind of the same notion. Telltale Games is really good at doing a good, well-crafted story, but as far as your options, they are extremely limited. In fact,
especially in the case of Borderlands.
Yes, Borderlands, and I'll let you take this one over, because I think you had some very poignant words about how your dialogue choices didn't have any reflection in how the other characters perhaps treated you in the game.
Yes, especially in the case of Reese.
Yes.
Basically, to kind of preface my opinion of Tales from the Borderlands, again, I've enjoyed it for the most part, and I think it's a well-crafted, humorous story. But the problem is, I think Telltale was a bit up their own ass as far as how proud they were of this story, so they were almost afraid that the player would somehow tarnish or ruin it
by those pesky little choices they offer you.
Yeah, exactly. As such, most of the choices you're presented with in the game are not really choices, or they don't have any major impact on the story, which would have been fine because we've, seen something similar in previous Telltale games. But at the very least, in something like The Wolf Among Us or the first 2 seasons of The Walking Dead, the way you behave towards other characters and the options, sometimes the hard choices you had to make, do you save character X or do you save character Y, actually had an effect on how the other survivors, the other members of your group, or in the case of The Wolf Among Us, other citizens of Fabletown would treat you. Whereas in the case of Tales from the Borderlands, there's just nothing. Like, for example, let's take the storyline of Reese, right? Reese starts out as a very kind of like out of touch, white collar pencil pusher on a Hyperion, right?
Right.
He's obviously hunting for this high position of like the vice president of the company and whatnot, but he gets screwed over by a competitor who's even more sleazier than him,
Yep.
Vasquez, right? So him and his friends, that being Vaughn and what's her face, the backstabbing black bitch, whatever her name is, Yvonne, I think, something like that. So you and your friends concoct this scheme to get back at Vasquez by stealing his money and also stealing the vault key that he was after. So you travel to Pandora, and obviously it's like a classic fish out of water scenario where Reese and Vaughn are just not accustomed to the level of brutality and, the dog eats dog mentality that is Pandora. It's kind of...
Yeah, imagine it was like some guy who was caught like extorting from a company getting thrown to a mass security prison with a bunch of, murderers and thieves and all kinds of shit.
And over the course of the story, you see more of Pandora, you encounter more cutthroats, vault hunters. There are moments when, at least in my playthrough, I actually tried to make...
Just every playthrough. I'm gonna prove it in a second, though, but go ahead. That every playthrough is almost the same.
Yeah, which is a personal gripe of mine, but I'll get to that in a second. So, in my playthrough, I tried to make Reese basically man up over the course of the story because... well, it only makes sense, that's the character arc. He starts as a very naive, very out-of-touch, fish-out-of-water type of character, but then he encounters all of these hardships. He basically gets this close to getting killed numerous times. He has Handsome Jack trapped, or like an IE version of Handsome Jack in his head, controlling his actions, so he's got all these different hurdles that he has to overcome, so you would think that at the end, he would become a more hardened character,
right?
A more well-rounded devil-may-care type, especially once you see him in the future, in the flash-forward scenes, right? He looks different, he's got a different hairstyle, he's got these tattoos on his body, he's got a new cybernetic arm, and once you actually get to episode 5 and you get to know why he looks different, and that's because he actually becomes a CEO of Atlas. He is actually a brilliant hacker, a brilliant CEO and whatnot, so you would think that as a result of all of this, and as a result of your actions and how you treat other characters, Reese would not only develop as a character, yes, but also garner respect of other characters, including Fiona and her sister, as well as, all the other denizens of Pandora and whatnot. But no, regardless of what you do, it's sort of set in stone that Reese is a wimp, and therefore he's going to be the butt of every single joke, regardless of how you play through the game.
Yep, pretty much. And that goes the same way with, like, if you want to try to schmooze Fiona's sister, Sasha, I believe it is. You could play Don Juan and, really say all the right things and get, all the right responses from her, and she starts really, like the way that you act towards her and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, she reciprocates your advances.
Yeah, she starts to kind of smile more at the character and stuff and respect you more. And
she starts seeing you as a man. That's what she does.
Basically. And at the end, by chapter 5, she still passes by you and heads straight to Vaughn to hug him because she thought he was dead, and she doesn't really give a shit about you. And the only way that you can technically really, like...
win her over?
No, not even win her over. Like, what's the right word? It all boils down to, no matter what you said to her, you get this choice from Fiona: do you like my sister? And you get 3 options.
5 minutes before the end of the fucking game.
Yes.
The two characters literally stop in their tracks,
yes,
just to give you an option to basically ship yourself with Sasha.
Yes.
Which is kind of really fucked up and incestuous if you think about it, because you play as both of these characters throughout the entire game, and all of a sudden you're forced as Fiona to ask Reese about whether or not he wants to bang your sister. And then as Fiona, you're forced to either give your blessing or to forbid him from seeing her sister, despite the fact that even if you say yes, she then says, but then again, both of you are adults, so why the hell do I care?
Well,
and it's like, well, yeah, that's right. Sasha is an adult, so surely the decision should be up to her based on what you did and what you said throughout the previous episodes of the game, because remember, this game was made after The Wolf Among Us. And one thing I liked a lot about The Wolf Among Us is that in addition to the choices you made throughout the game, at the end of episode 5, basically at the end of the whole game, it also gave you an additional screen that listed all the side characters you interact with and what kind of relationship you had with them. So, for example, if you tried to help Mr. Toad with his rental situation and you didn't try to force him to move to the farm, the game actually says, yeah, you were actually friendly to Mr. Toad. Same thing with your pig roommate. What are the 3 little pigs? Again, either you were a massive dick and you tried to evict him, or you actually decided to look the other way and let him stay in your apartment. Same thing with the Beauty and the Beast. For example, if you don't divulge Beauty's secret to the Beast, it actually says, yeah, you actually kept your mouth shut. Same thing with basically all the other characters. Even someone like, what's his face? Georgie Porgy, the pimp. It even lists your relationship with the pimp. So I thought, Telltale has this track record of, they try something in one game, they perfect the formula, and that becomes the staple in the next game. So I thought that surely a similar thing is going to happen at the end of Tales from the Borderlands. For example, in some of the early episodes of, I think it was episode 2, or maybe even 1, you can either try to strike a deal with Vasquez to get back into his good graces by selling Vaughn, your friend, as the fall guy, right?
Right.
And you can either accept his deal, or you can tell him to go fuck himself, which is what I did. So I thought, surely this is going to have an effect on my friendship with Vaughn.
Nope.
Because early on, I'm not done yet. Because early on in episode 1, for example, you can either be, when you think you're about to get a promotion, and Vaughn says something to the effect of, yeah, you did it, Reese, and you can either be a total megalomaniacal douchebag and say, yes, I deserve this.
Machiavellian, yeah, I did it.
Of course you did. I'm not surprised in the slightest. But or you can actually be more humble and it's like, hey, look, all of us did this and all of us are going to benefit as a result.
That was actually the option I picked, so...
Oh, I thought you went with the whole megalomaniacal, yes, I deserve this.
Oh, no. I was playing it like I would. I mean, you scratch someone's back and they... of course, that's considered Machiavellian too, is, generosity gets reciprocation, but... But yeah, I mean, that's the exact same thing I did. We're all part of a team, and I kind of played at that entire angle, and it probably got me nothing, right?
Yeah, well, that's the thing. I made the same, and this is actually my point. I made the same decision. I was actually friendly with Vaughn, and I actually confided in him and told him that Handsome Jack is in my head. So I was thinking that by the time we're gonna meet with Vaughn later in episode 4 or 5, because he disappears halfway through the story, right? His reaction to me is going to be based on how I treated him.
Right.
For example, if I were a douchebag, maybe once he becomes the leader of this Mad Max community of refugees, he's going to try to kill me, or he's going to be adverse towards me. Nope. Regardless of what you do, it's set in stone that the two of you are going to be BFFs regardless of what you do. And of course, the same thing with
bro.
Yes, which makes for a fine joke, but once you take into consideration the fact that I'd spent at least 10 hours of my life on this game, it makes you wonder if...
Joke's on you, Max.
Yeah, it makes you wonder if it was worth it, because none of it really matters. And again, the same thing with Sasha. This was probably the most infuriating thing, because again, as a part of my playthrough, I tried to actually force Reese to grow a pair. So, when push came to shove, he was decisive. He took action, he was confident, he flirted with Sasha, he teased her constantly, because the thing is, and I'll give Telltale credit here, because, again, it's kind of set in stone that the two of you are going to become an item, or at the very least they push you in that direction, but at the very least, they give you diverse options of how to interact with her. So you can either actually be a ladies' man and tease her. Like in episode 3, you can actually take action and you can plant that flower on her head, which is kind of a romantic moment, I suppose. Or you can actually be the most disgusting nice guy ever and kiss her ass every single time and basically be, oh, Sasha, you're so beautiful, please suck my dick, But the problem is, again, regardless of what you do, regardless of what you say, instead of your actions and words having an effect on, if not the ending, at the very least on the way other characters treat you, instead, like I said, 5 minutes until the very end, oh, by the way, do you want to bang Sasha? Yes, okay, here you go.
Exactly. But of course, just to correct you a while back, you're not playing Fiona that particular moment. You're playing as Reese, and Fiona asks you the question. Reese has three answers.
No. Here's the thing: you actually go back and forth between the two of them.
Yeah. Okay. Yes, that's true. But in this particular instance, you get 3 options. One is yes, I think I like your sister. 2, I'm just gonna play it by ear and kind of see how things go. I'm not gonna try to push things. And number 3 is like, oh no, I don't like your sister at all. Why is this even an option? If you did all the right moves, this shouldn't even become an issue. She should just come out and say, oh, by the way, I think my sister actually likes you if you treated her right.
Yes.
Or something like that. Like she says, by the way, my sister can't stand your guts.
Yeah, stay away from
prat.
my sister, you pathetic mangina, or something like that.
you herbivore man.
Well, it's not even that. I mean, you're just a pathetic creep who, like I said, Sasha, I like you. Ugh, get away from me, you fucking creep.
Yeah, exactly.
But what I was gonna say, yes, this is ideally what should happen, because cause and effect. Again, the choices you make in this game have a direct impact on the outcome of this. No, sorry, not in this case, Telltale. I like you, but not in this case.
What's even more infuriating is there's a better example of this. All right, so let's say you have Handsome Jack in your head, which is a given, and you can keep him a secret from everybody else and all this other stuff, and you come up to a choice, right? You're sitting in Handsome Jack's office, and Handsome Jack is like, the virtual representation of him is like, by the way, I choose you to take over Hyperion. I want you to run my company. And you get a choice, or you think you get a choice. You can either accept to take over the company, which I did. I was like, hey, I could be the head guy in charge, and I could, change things, and probably get people out of jail who are being caught and stuff, and all your friends are being pursued and arrested and whatnot. It's like I could do a lot as president, or you can choose to refuse the power. Mm-hmm. Now here's the thing: I played originally accepting the power because I'm like, hey, I could do some pretty cool stuff. And I got the ending where, obviously Handsome Jack tries to basically force you to do what he wants. I mean, he wants to put your head onto a machine and some other really weird shit.
Yeah.
So I'm like, okay, well, this is a choice I played. I'm not going to go back and replay it. So I went into YouTube and watched a replay where they chose
the opposite.
Where they chose to refuse this pivotal end of the 4th chapter option. And you know what happens? The chair you're sitting in straps you in, and all these fucking knives and saw blades and punching gloves and all this weird shit comes out and threatens you to accept it.
Mm-hmm.
So you have literally no choice.
Yes, and worst of all, this was the ending of episode 4, but in the beginning of episode 5, regardless of what you do, you don't actually get to be in charge of Hyperion. You don't really have any power. Handsome Jack, sooner or later, he still betrays you, and you still try to escape and reconvene with your friends.
Yep.
But again,
I actually made the same choice that you did, and I'm gonna tell you why. Because
great minds think alike. That's why.
Yes, yeah, of course. But here's the thing: like I said before, between the two of us, you're better acquainted with the Borderlands series.
Right.
So you actually probably knew that this could happen because that's the nature of Handsome Jack. And again, I will concede that his betrayal is in character. Like, this is something that Handsome Jack would do. But here's the problem. The reason I decided to accept his proposal is not so much because I'm a power-hungry megalomaniac, of course not, but more because, like, throughout episode 4, that's when you and your friends go to Hyperion, right? And again, as
Right.
someone who was not familiar with Hyperion or anything Borderlands related, this was the first time I actually saw the company, and I was appalled because so much power, so much money, so many things that could be accomplished, but instead it's a bunch of fucking white-collar, spoiled, coddled men children who are playing with finger guns in the cafeteria.
Yep.
I was like,
The polo shirt wearing complete patsies.
yeah, I was like, holy shit, here I thought that this was like the Empire from Star Wars. Like, they're evil, but at the very least they're effective. No, they're idiots.
Yep.
They're like a bunch of millennials in white-collar jobs who have all this money and all this power, but they don't really do anything.
Yep.
It's like if an entire company was composed of human resources. They're useless.
Yes.
So I see all of that, and I was like, I can change this. And not only that, but when you play episode 4 from Fiona's perspective, in that particular moment in the story, she gets accosted by Yvonne, the black chick, and some security guards, so it's like, oh shit, they're gonna be captured. So I'm gonna use this power of the CEO of the company to actually tell the guards to fuck off and imprison Yvonne instead. Like you said in your playthrough, like, I can actually help the guys. But then instead, episode 5 begins, and turns out that Handsome Jack betrays you, and regardless of what you do, which again is kind of in his character, but at the same time, why even give us an option if it's not really an option?
Yes.
And worst of all,
Exactly.
regardless of what you do, even if you do reject his power or if you become the president, all of a sudden, once you see things from Fiona's perspective, Sasha, who's meant to be the your one true love of your life that you're destined to be with at the end, the first thing out of her mouth is, we gotta go, Reese has betrayed us, once Hyperion, always Hyperion, leave him to die, even though 5 minutes later, the fucking Hyperion space station falls out of orbit, so for all she knows, Reese could be dead. And then once she meets him, like, several months later, once we get to the future in episode 5, and her first reaction is just to ignore him and go embrace Vaughn, a character she had previously had less than 5 minutes of screen time together and barely interacted with.
Yep.
But regardless of what you do, like, maybe, I mean, for fuck's sake, you defeat Handsome Jack. You defeat Space Hitler.
A charismatic Space Hitler.
Hey, he's a likable villain, I'll give him that, but
Yeah.
still, the guy is a genocidal maniac.
True.
You defeat him, and in my version of the playthrough, you tear off your fucking arm
And your eye.
out. Yes, which is a painful scene, and Telltale are masters of forcing you to do all of this nasty, body mutilation stuff.
Yes.
But anyways, it's a gruesome scene to watch, and at the end, I actually reject Handsome Jack and I crush the cybernetic eye. So, by all means, people should be saluting me as the fucking hero. But instead, because Reese, it's, like I said, it's set in stone that Reese is a wimp and everyone's punching bag, she just basically spits in my face the moment she sees me again. No, oh, Reese, you're alive, and thanks for bringing down Hyperion and killing Handsome Jack and not turning...
Or at least doing what a rational woman would do. And
well, first of all, there is no such thing, so what the fuck are you talking about?
I knew I was setting that up. God damn it. No, I'm saying what a rational woman would do is, okay, say like you and Sasha are, doing all this mingling. You guys start connecting. You guys are all schmoozing, and you really play the cool guy. You put the flower in her hair, and you really,
Yes, you basically have a pair between your legs.
Basically, yeah. And then you do all this stuff, and she immediately hates you. You wouldn't think that one of her first reactions is, you owe me an explanation or something like that. What the hell happened? What's all this stuff with Handsome Jack? What were you doing?
Something like that. Not this ruthless ball busting that comes completely out of nowhere.
Yeah, basically.
Especially considering the fact that up until episode 3 or 4, it's revealed that she still has some lingering feelings for August, who's the biggest douchebag ever. So, again, you're trying to win her over. Throughout the course of the game, she treats you like crap, and then somehow 5 minutes before the end of the game, oh yes, Sasha is the love of my life, I accept your proposal.
And I know what you're saying on this front. Whenever you have non-interactive story moments, she treats you like shit.
Everyone does. Every
yes.
single character does. regardless of how you like during the moments when you actually have control over the story, you could be decisive. You could take action. You can actually get things accomplished by hacking the security cameras or finding stuff that you're looking for.
You could be competent.
Yeah, but
And you can also be altruistic in the sense of, accepting Handsome Jack's proposal to take over Hyperion. You could be altruistic. You'd be like, hey, I'm going to change things for the better.
again, you can. This is probably my major complaint about Tales from the Borderlands, in that there is this massive discrepancy, at least in the case of Reese, between how you play the game and how Telltale wants your character to be. It's like during the scripted events and the non-scripted events,
Black and white.
at least in my case, Reese was two completely different characters.
Wow.
Yeah, it was almost like schizophrenic.
Wow. So, in conclusion, Borderlands, I really liked the story. I thought it had some really great humor and some great character moments. But as far as a choose-your-own-adventure type game, it was extremely limiting, especially in the story elements, as we just got done describing. So how about those Game of Thrones?
Yeah, from what you've told me, you have not yet completed Game of Thrones.
I have not.
So
I think I'm on. I just started to meet the Dragon Lady, the Daenerys Targaryen.
So we're talking episode 3, episode 4 at best.
4, I think. I think I went through 3 already. So.
All right, yeah. So which is why we're not gonna go into too much detail about Game of Thrones in this particular.
Because we'll spoil the shit for you guys, though. But I can't get it. I can't get spoiled on this.
Well, it's preferential treatment. Hashtag cronyism.
Well, I mean, I actually did have a question. Okay, so I just got done. Like, I'm the dude. I'm the forester who has like the gimp leg. And I'm meeting the woman I was betrothed to, and she starts going back and forth about whether or not we should make an alliance. And I don't say what should be like the pragmatic answer that, hey, I'll give you half my forest to your father if he helps us out here. I don't say that, and she decides not to help me out. Right? Is that going to come back and bite me in the ass?
Potentially yes. Perhaps not to the effect that you think, like in the grand scope of things, but there are at the very least 2 crucial scenes that I can think of that may have an entirely different outcome depending on if you do this, if you manage to forge an alliance with her family or not. One of the scenes, a very gruesome appearance by everyone's favorite psychopath Ramsay Snow, which was as gruesome as it was amusing to watch. It was almost like if the Joker made a cameo in the game, the Christopher Nolan version of the Joker, to be exact.
No, he gives him the old Chelsea grin, huh?
Close enough. So, again, like I said, we're not going to go into too much detail about Game of Thrones, at the very least, the specifics of the story, because you haven't finished it yet, so it's kind of futile to bring up any sort of examples post episode 3. But one thing I will say about Game of Thrones is that unlike in the case of Borderlands, the final episode of the game does vary to a significant effect depending on the final choice you make in the penultimate episode. There's no bait and switch of you think you have a choice, but you don't really have a choice. So there's that, and also depending on how the actual episode 5, on how the game ends, it will also have, from what I've read, an effect on Season 2, because there will be a Season 2 of Game of Thrones, the video game, and which is kind of interesting because at the end, without giving any major details away, we end up with a Walking Dead Season 2 finale scenario on our hands, where, depending on your choices, you end up with, at the very least, 2 disparate possibilities / outcomes on your hands. So it would be very interesting to see how Telltale manages to bridge the gap between Season 1 and Season 2, keeping in mind all the differences, or at least different outcomes that various players will have, because one thing I'll tell you for sure is that depending on what you do, you may end up with one less character in your roster. member of the House Forrester family, going from season 1 to season 2. So, presumably, if that character survives in your playthrough, they will make, I almost gave away who it is, they will make an appearance in season 2, and if they don't survive, you're not going to be able to play their campaign at all because, well, they're dead.
Yeah.
Again, we're not going to go into detail about Game of Thrones, but Game of Thrones gives me hope that Telltale still knows what they're doing as far as interactive storytelling, because unlike in the case of Borderlands, it seems to me that Telltale actually set out to write an interactive story as opposed to a story that you have very limited control over, like in the case of Borderlands.
Okay, so Game of Thrones sounds like it has a lot more impact as far as like what you do actually does have some weight on what you get in the end. So I'll have to finish that one up, certainly.
Yes. Just as an FYI, we're not going to talk about the Minecraft game in this particular After Hours because
neither one of us have it.
That and neither of us really have any interest in playing it in the first place. And I think you also mentioned something to the effect of it not
it has
really
mixed reviews. Yeah, I've read on Steam that some people think it's alright, but some people think that it is really dumbed down and it's like kindergarten humor, and the story's boring and the characters are kind of weak. Those are the negative reviews, mind you. There's still some positive reviews, but I've definitely heard that it's not as strong. It's not Telltale Games' strongest outing, so that's kind of disappointing.
See, the Telltale fanboy in me wants to say, well, then again, you see, it's Minecraft, so what do you expect? But on the other hand, being the new, more objective individual that I am, the question worth asking is, well, if that's the case, why even make a story-driven game based in Minecraft in the first place?
Mm-hmm. Well, like Telltale Games does, they bank on IPs. I mean, every single game that they've made is not necessarily an independent IP, at least not since previous to their old point-and-click, puzzle agent games.
Yeah, which I personally have no problem with. I think it's pretty obvious that Telltale has managed to rise to notoriety by making these spin-off games, if you will, that are either connected to or set in the same universe as an already popular IP of some sorts. Obviously, The Walking Dead, you have the comic book and the TV show. The Wolf Among Us is based on the Fables comic series. Game of Thrones is based on the show and the book series of the same name, and Borderlands is based on Borderlands. But here's the thing.
Yep.
In all of these examples, even Borderlands, I will give credit Telltale for being able to take all of these different continuities and stories and genres and whatnot and expanding on them.
Right.
Like I said last time in the case of The Wolf Among Us, they literally took a single paragraph of text from the comic book describing the period of Fabletown prior to the events of the comic book when Ichabod Crane was in charge, and they managed to concoct a beautiful film noir detective story out of it. Like 90% of the events and the characters that you interact with in that game, that's all Telltale. That's their invention.
Right. Yeah, you can definitely see that Telltale has a knack for trying to create stories out of existing IPs, either to bank on them or just because that's what they're good at. Because you gotta admit, there hasn't been a good Game of Thrones game like ever before Telltale Games came along.
No.
Borderlands, of course, was there, but then there's also the IP of The Walking Dead, and how they tried making that whole entire Daryl game, Primal Hunt, or whatever the hell they wanted to call it.
Survival instinct, and the less said about that game, the better.
Yeah, that one. A game based on the TV show, which failed horribly.
Yeah, which tried to be a prequel, but again, lesser writing, and that kind of shows that Telltale's strong suit is obviously the writing.
Oh, absolutely.
But the problem is the second part of their official title of their organization is Telltale Games.
Right.
And right now, the games part is severely lacking because in the case of Borderlands, Like, if Borderlands is any indication of where Telltale wants to go in the future, I gotta be honest, I have my reservations because, like I said before, if I'm gonna invest 10 hours of my life into this story, and if they say that your actions, every single decision you make is gonna have an effect on the ending, it better fucking damn well have an actual impact on the ending, because otherwise...
Right.
Like, even going back briefly, very briefly, back to the romance with Sasha, the thing is, like, if you take an example, for example, another story-driven game like, say, the Mass Effect series or the Witcher series, like, over the course of those stories, you can interact various female characters, and you also have dialogue trees, and if you say the right things, and maybe if you can complete a side quest, you end up banging that chick. And here's the thing, at the very least, you have the satisfaction of knowing that you got to see that, you know, PG-13 sex scene that Fox News objected to back in the day.
I got to see a naked shoulder and a naked hip.
Look, but at the very least, you have the satisfaction of knowing that you actually accomplished that. You know, someone else in the...
You put in there a notch on your headboard.
Yes, in Commander Shepard's headquarters and whatnot. But again, you know, at the very least, those games can claim that there is an effect on this. You know, it might not be a major effect on the story, but at the very least, it's something that you accomplished via your actions and your words. Whereas in Borderlands, again, the romance thing was very forced, and it all boils down to a single decision you make.
At the end, yes. And again, that was my major issue of contempt with The Wolf Among Us. But I won't get into that right now. But something that, again, is sorely lacking in the gameplay area is Telltale Games, back in their days when they were making, like, you know, Back to the Future, Sam and Max, and the Monkey Island games, even like Strong Bad's, you know, cool game for attractive people based on the Homestar Runner series. All of these were point-and-click games where you interact with characters and you walk around, you free roam for the most part, and, you know, collect clues and you get to the end. And you see that has kind of been trumped by the storytelling aspect, which in most circumstances is fine, but in the not Game of Thrones, in the Walking Dead game, it actually had those same type of elements. You gotta go, you know, you gotta explore the house in chapter 2 of The Walking Dead season 1 and find out that, you know, oh my god, they're cannibals.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, you gotta find items and you gotta, like, you know, collect them and you gotta basically survive. Whereas I got very little of that in Borderlands, and not a ton of that in, like, the Game of Thrones so far, where you gotta, like, find items, collect them, you have to use certain items certain places. Instead, it's very, very story driven, and everything is always pushed forward. Like in Borderlands, you got that, I don't know, that Batman detective view thing with your magic robot eye, where you can see every little clue on these certain parts where you actually have to kind of like scavenge for items, but there's only like 3 things you gotta look at. So I'm really disappointed in the gameplay aspect of this, as well as the fact that they're touted as being you choose the decisions that, you know, has an effect on the ending. It really doesn't.
Yeah, the thing about the first season of The Walking Dead, and to a lesser extent the second one, is that, as you said, the gameplay was basically a happy medium between a traditional point-and-click adventure game and a story-driven, choose-your-own-adventure, heavy rain type of interactive narrative, right?
Right.
So, personally, moving on, finally getting to the recent Batman game that was announced by Telltale. Yeah, this is meant to be the actual crux of the discussion.
Except it was all Borderlands.
Yeah, well, no, the thing is, it's a good thing we discussed all of that, because now people will understand why. Personally, I'm excited about the prospect of this, because...
Oh yeah, Batman rocks.
Yes, both of us, I think it's fair to say that both of us are fans of both Batman and Telltale, so it's kind of a match made in heaven, even though personally, like, you know, every now and again I would catch myself thinking about potential properties that Telltale could turn into an interactive story, and never once did I think Batman, like, because...
Yeah.
I don't know why, but, you know, Telltale has, like, a proven track record of making spin-offs of stuff, they don't really focus on the main characters of, say, The Walking Dead. Like, the game is set in the comic series, but it's an entirely different cast of characters. Same thing with Game of Thrones. You do interact with, say, Ramsay Snow or Jon Snow or Tyrion Lannister and whatnot, but you're not playing as them. You're playing as a whole different family. And, of course, with Borderlands, it's a sequel to all the previous games. It has an entirely different cast of characters and whatnot. So, in the case of Batman, I was like, oh.
You're playing as the main character rather than a side character behind the scenes, yes.
Yeah, when I first heard, I thought, like, okay, well, maybe you get to play as, I don't know, the Red Hood or Robin number 17 or something like that. Some very, minor character who maybe gets to interact with Batman, Alfred, or maybe, some of the villains like Two-Face or Mr. Freeze. But no, apparently you are actually playing as the Caped Crusader this time around.
Yes.
Which is very interesting.
Unusual. Yeah, well, like you said, you and I are both fans of Batman, and we're both fans of Telltale Games. But I also like chocolate, and I also like bacon cheeseburgers, but I don't put them together. I have my reservations for the exact same reasons you stated. Telltale Games work best when you're kind of like a character that doesn't really matter to the whole picture, whereas now they're taking on the titular character of Batman, and you are Bruce Wayne. You're not a reporter trying to find out who Batman is and getting sucked into this world of crime, and really experiencing this universe. An example I just want to bring up very quickly is like that John Wick movie, where it's a pretty shallow movie though, but the universe, you want to spend more time in that universe where it's all assassins and all these really crazy things. But in this case, you're playing as Batman, and it's like that's almost too much.
Depends on how they handle the gameplay, because
here's
the thing.
Again, everything's still up in the air. So
Again, there aren't much details about this game at the moment, but when you talked about exploration, like in the first season of The Walking Dead, and being able to interact with the environment and solve puzzles and whatnot.
You can free roam, and through free roaming, you find clues that eventually you come to the next part.
Yes, and here's the thing. What do we know about Batman? We know that he is a detective, the world's greatest detective, as a matter of fact. So, and even though personally I like the Arkham series by Rocksteady for the most part, the thing that always lacked in those games, in my opinion, was the detective element. Because, it's an action-adventure game, so most of the emphasis is put on free roaming as Batman, using the grappling hook and the glider wings to glide through Gotham City, beating the ever-loving crap out of the thugs, and in the case of the most recent game, using the Batmobile to drive around and whatnot. So Rocksteady's massive faux pas with the PC port of Arkham Knight aside, they did actually fulfill what they promised in the advertising of Arkham Knight when they say, be the Batman. Technically we got to do everything as Batman aside from actually solving crime.
Right.
Because the very few moments where, and usually it's like the side missions, where you get to solve some sort of crime, it's a very simplistic monkey sees, monkey does thing where you show up to the crime scene and like you're talking with either Oracle or Alfred, and they basically tell you to turn on the detective vision, and they highlight the areas where you need to look. You look there, you hold the X button, and then Batman gives you the exposition that after analyzing the DNA, I was able to deduct that this person frequented this apartment building and blah blah blah. And next thing you know, you figure out that this is actually Mr. Zsasz killing all these people. You find Mr. Zsasz, you punch the ever-loving crap out of him, and that's it. Mystery solved. So, given the fact that, this is going to be a Telltale game, I don't think they're going to put much emphasis on the combat, or...
Oh, God, no. Well, yeah, the free roaming and the combat is the last thing they're going to do, because they haven't really done any of that in the past. At least not to the effect of the Arkham games. I mean, you cannot beat that. Telltale can't possibly beat that.
Yes. And if Telltale are smart, which I think they are, they're going to use this opportunity to contrast with the Arkham games.
Mm-hmm. Stand out apart. Yep.
Yes, and instead offer a different type of gameplay, a different experience of being Batman, one that's more story-driven, one that's more about exploration and detective work.
Yeah, and the trailer that they released is black and white, highly inked, and if you notice the Batman symbol looks kind of like the Frank Miller Dark Knight Returns. symbol.
Yeah, kind of.
So I wonder if they're not going to go with more of like a gritty noir type of angle with Batman, which would be really...
Well, they have to.
Well, I'm saying that'd be really, really cool. I mean, versus, the insane Arkham Knight stuff, which is cool in its own right, but Batman is fluid enough, the mythos is fluid enough where you could have, definitely, like you said, have the detective elements in like a 30s mobster Batman the Animated Series type of environment.
Yeah, because personally, it's pretty obvious that I'm at the very least cautiously optimistic about this property.
Right.
And if...
Star Wars! It's coming out! It's been gone for so long! Oh my god, read our comic!
Yes, exactly. If you want to hear our opinions on the recent Star Wars movie, or more importantly, all the hype surrounding it, go to our website and read the latest webcomic, you goddamn fanboys.
Made by Max himself. Well, written by Max.
Yeah, so obviously it's going to be great. Just like the Phantom Menace, remember that bit in the Blinket reviews where it's footage of Steven Spielberg and George Lucas? It's going to be great. It's going to be great. Yes,
It's going to be great. It's going to be great.
Yeah, and then you saw the movie. Oh
no.
But anyways, going back to Batman, what I was trying to say is I'm cautiously optimistic about it, and if they manage to have the same level of mature writing and that gritty film noir film as was present in The Wolf Among Us, I'm on board. But
Yeah.
as far as the gameplay goes, please, for the love of fuck, Telltale, give us some interactivity. Let us solve actual crimes,
Let's go back to the actual point and click origins, and then also have the dialogue trees and great stories that you guys currently have. You guys got to take a step back, unfortunately, to some of your earliest games as far as like the point and click aspects.
Yeah, I mean, maybe instead of having, obviously there's probably going to be like a large overarching story, but maybe have every single episode be a standalone case, kind of like the Batman Black and White comic book, where every single story is a standalone mini narrative of its own. So maybe one episode there are these gruesome murders where some psychopath is mutilating the bodies and whatnot, and you investigate the crime scene, you put together the pieces. Maybe then you go back to the Batcave and actually get access to the Bat computer, and you actually have to use
your brains,
use reason and deductive skills and whatnot, and then you actually find all the necessary pieces of evidence in the various locations and whatnot. You try to come up with a motive, and once you put all the pieces of the puzzle together, it's fucking Mr. Zsasz. Time to catch Mr. Zsasz. And then maybe at the end you have some sort of confrontation, and based on whether or not you manage to apprehend the culprit, like the public's reaction to Batman changes. Like in the beginning they think that he's some sort of crazed vigilante that beats up, how about civil rights in Gotham and whatnot? Who is this man to proclaim that he's the absolute judge, jury, and executioner and whatnot? But then you actually stop people from dying based on your actions, Telltale.
Yeah.
This is the important part. And as a result, the opinion of the public changes. Like you said, maybe this is going to be in part based on the Frank Miller continuity, Dark Knight Returns. And what was important about Dark Knight Returns, the news segments, right?
Yeah.
The people's opinion of Batman, the different points of view and whatnot. You can also incorporate this into this version of the Caped Crusader. You can actually present the public's opinion of Batman as a result of your actions at the end of episodes.
Yes, have the right versus left argument at the very end on the nightly news. That'd be pretty sweet. But honestly, the Batman Black and White was the first thing I thought of when I saw this trailer, and then I saw the logo. I'm like, wait a minute, that looks like the Frank Miller logo. But maybe it's something completely different. I don't know. But I'm really hoping again with the black and white theme, they go to a more detective-based more detective-based game, and save the freaking QuickTime events for whenever you actually need to apprehend a criminal. Really good point-and-click elements to solve a crime, and then at the very end when you're trying to apprehend the suspect, then you have all the QuickTime events, and you got all the rest of the stuff that you guys are doing more this day and age than the point-and-click elements. But another question I have is, okay, so their new game is going to be Batman. They have another Walking Dead game that's not featuring Clementine. So I don't know if this is going to raise a lot of controversy, though, but it's almost like Telltale Games are like a competent LJN. LJN, for those of you who don't know, back in the NES days and Super Nintendo days, they were kind of IP horrors. They were like, hey, we'll make a Beetlejuice game. Hey, we'll make a Bill and Ted game. They basically took...
Hey, we'll make a Schindler's List game.
Oh, God. Jesus Christ.
No, they weren't that shameless.
Yeah, I know, but basically what LJN did was they basically made cheap games that had really big Hollywood names, games based on movies and comics and that kind of thing, and they were genuinely crap. Whereas, granted, Telltale Games does excellent work, but they're also doing this IP whoring. I mean, they're not making something new. They're always going after like Batman and Walking Dead and Game of Thrones and whatever's kind of popular, right?
Yes.
You can even see this in their two poker games. Well, there's three of them, but the two poker games that involve different characters. Like, the first poker game had like strong bad, and they made a strong bad game. They had the heavy character from Team Fortress 2, and maybe that was supposed to be a game that never really came about. They also had Penny Arcade character. Maybe that was a game that was never supposed to come out in the second game. They had Ash Williams in the second poker game also, and also GLaDOS. But then they also had Claptrap from the Borderlands games.
And of course, that turned out into Tales from the Borderlands.
And that one became Telltale Games Borderlands. So I wonder if like Telltale Games doesn't like try to schmooze up for like certain IP so that they could kind of be like, hey, we're gonna make a competent storytelling game using your IP versus having doing something more original, kind of like that. I don't want to say far superior though, but it technically kind of is that Until Dawn game on the PlayStation 4.
Not sure if I'd describe it as a superior game because the writing is shit. But as far as the choices,
yes. But the gameplay and the choices are significantly better. And of course, it's probably got a huge fucking budget and it's all 3D and rendered. And honestly, it still looks like crap in my opinion. But it's based on like serial killers and saws, and it has a supernatural twist ending that kind of sucked. But Vendigos everywhere. Yes. But here's the thing though. In that particular game, the choices do kind of seem to matter a little bit more. For instance, you're playing as one of the nerdy jocular characters, right? The smart ass geek, right? And he has a crush on this other slightly geeky girl, and you're both in this saw-like trap, right? And they have these saw blades coming down from the ceiling, and you're the guy. You have one shot, and the guy's not going to release either of you unless you either shoot her or you shoot yourself, right? So it's Saw in a nutshell, right? So you can choose to either shoot her or you shoot yourself, and if you choose to shoot yourself, obviously it's just a test, it's a blank, nothing happens, right? But she since you kind of have a little bit of chemistry going on with this girl, she kind of sees you in a different light and starts to like you. If you try shooting her, she sees you for basically the asshole that you are. Don't shoot me, bang, you asshole, you son of a bitch, you tried killing me, right? Okay, so later on in the game, when the Vendigos start coming out of the woodwork, which is the part of the game I kind of lost interest in, you're fighting off the Wendigos, and if you don't fight them off, obviously you die. The game goes on without you, you're dead. If you fight them off successfully, you get to the front door of the house, and that's where the girl is at, right? If you didn't shoot her, she opens the door for you. So you can escape and you live. If you shot her, she does not open the door for you, and you die.
It's a nice cause and effect / butterfly effect type of thing, yes.
Exactly. It's not like, Telltale's where, like, all of a sudden you're playing as the girl and you get a little option box that says, open the door or keep it closed.
Or...
It's based entirely on what you did, kind of like what Borderlands should have done when you're schmoozing up to Sasha. Based on how you treated her, you should have just... gotten the little ending blurb where, hey, you like my sister, she likes you too, or my sister thinks you're a dick.
Yes.
Not to use gender discriminatory terms. Sorry, I just got to throw a little bit of SJW in there.
Yeah, although I was thinking of a different analogy. Chances are, if Until Dawn was done by Telltale, in that particular situation, if you had not shot the chick in question, she would have been the one to open the door for you, and if you try to shoot her, obviously she's mad at you, but it would have been someone else who would have opened the door for you. Like, you still would have survived.
Yes.
Because the story says so.
Yes, because the story dictates that certain characters have to die and certain characters have to still be around for the rest of the story. Yes, that's kind of the issue at heart.
Yes, and again, we said this last time when we talked about Telltale.
We said this dozens of times.
What I'm trying to say is that I can imagine that it is a nightmare to attempt to write an interactive story and come up with all these different forks in the road. It's like, instead of writing a single coherent story, you gotta write at the very least 3 different ones. And even then, those 3 different ones also have branches that sometimes intertwine, sometimes one path leads into another, and so it's a massive nightmare. So I understand that it's very, very hard, if not even impossible, to live up to the claim that every single action you have is going to have an impact on the story, because otherwise, certain actions would basically lead to a game over screen at the end of like episode 1, and you'd have to restart the game and play it again over and over again, or maybe you get a bad ending during episode 4. So if you want to fix things, you got to go and replay episodes 1, 2, 3, 4, and then move forward and get the ending that you desire. So again, I understand that that Telltale is kind of between a rock and a hard place.
Yeah.
They have it much, much harder than most people who just write, linear stories and whatnot.
They probably didn't get a wheelbarrow full of money from Sony to make a game.
Yes, that too. But here's the thing. This is how Telltale rose to fame, as I said. This is their bread and butter, the whole interactive story thing. So if you're going to make such a bold assertion that your decisions matter and whatnot...
They need to matter.
Yes, at the very least... to the same effect they did in the first 2 seasons of The Walking Dead, or The Wolf Among Us, or Game of Thrones. Basically, don't make the same mistake as you did with Borderlands. Because otherwise, it's kind of infuriating to see Telltale, because we on Twitter follow their official account, right?
Yes.
And all the retweets is basically, oh my god, Borderlands, it's the greatest game ever, 10 out of 10, it's so beautiful, Sasha X Reese and whatnot. It's like, excuse me, how about you acknowledge some constructive criticism coming from, yours truly?
Yeah.
Otherwise, I'm kind of worried that they may be letting all this hype and constant adoration that they receive get to their head.
And they're becoming complacent. Because there's a significant drop in quality as far as the whole storytelling and gameplay aspects between Borderlands and the original Walking Dead. However, I mean, it has resurfaced apparently in Game of Thrones. I haven't finished it yet, so I'm just kind of taking your word for it. But yeah, Borderlands was extremely linear. You come to the same ending no matter what you'd really do. It's in that aspect, that's really disappointing. Great story, really funny, but it was just a disappointing game. Even interactive story, it was kind of disappointing.
Yeah. So I guess in conclusion, I mean, obviously we still like Telltale. They are one of the few game companies that I actually have faith in these days in the video game industry, because, at the very least, they're not following the same beaten path as everyone else. It's like, oh, we gotta copy what the Call of Duty series is doing because that's what's popular with the cool kids and whatnot.
Next we'll make a Call of Duty game that's just an interactive story. No shooting. It's just, behind the scenes.
Yeah, and it's gonna be you're gonna play as the dog in Call of Duty Ghosts. It's gonna be a prequel.
The dog will be found on as puppy, and then go to the pound, and you gotta escape from the pound, and you wander into a marine base or something like that, and then you get trained, and you quick time event to make the dog jump through a hoop or fetch a ball or something like that. And
yeah, here's how Sparky was basically trained to be a suicide bomber.
Oh God.
Yeah, so
one of the first choices is go to the military base or join ISIS.
Oh no. Oh, given the recent events, we're walking on dangerous territory here, my friend.
Well, you can't say ISIS. I mean, Jesus. They're in the news every single freaking day. But
well, you know what? If later tonight you get a knock on the door from some federal agents, the G-Man as they used to be called, it's on you. It's the consequences of your choice.
See, this is how real life works, folks. That's a genuine choice. Do I hit publish on YouTube or not? I got 5 seconds to make a choice. Hurry, Max. Which one do we do?
Yes. Do we incriminate ourselves or do we remain, docile at all status that just go with the status quo?
Remain silent. Don't choose anything. Just be silent.
All right. One question.
I was going to ask one question right before you get to yours. If you choose to be silent the entire game, does the game basically masturbate? Does it play itself?
That is a very good question, actually.
I'm actually tempted to do that one of these days. Just not press a button on any options and just see if I got the exact same ending that I would have gotten otherwise.
Well, there are the scripted events, at least in Borderlands. So
Oh, yeah. There's those.
it's not like you can actually play as a mute throughout the entire game, but I would imagine at the very least in the first season of The Walking Dead, Lee is not gonna garner the same respect and admiration as a leader as he gets. Because again, you meet Kenny in season 2 as Clementine, and you have a brief discussion about Lee, and his opinion of the man actually changes depending on how you played season 1 of the game. So, but yeah, you know what? Actually, if I wonder if someone has done a silent playthrough of any of Telltale's games, because again, if in the case of Borderlands you get the exact same ending as you did if you tried, like in our cases, to force Reese to grow a pair, then I'm gonna be fucking incensed, because it's like, again, I know I praised Telltale for this last time, for nihilism and whatnot, but here's the thing. Nihilism is appropriate in something like The Walking Dead because the world is fucked. Zombies are everywhere, so I can accept that, if you choose to save this character then later dies because, well, it's the apocalypse. You can die at any moment because there are zombies everywhere, right? But in the case of Borderlands, if, regardless of what you do, the game just kind of steers itself, kind of like in the case of that Order 1886.
Oh yeah, I was actually gonna bring that up. The Order 1886 or 7 or 9 or one of the fucking numbers. The Order. Let's call it the Order. But how like if you don't do something, you just keep on. Nothing happens. You gotta literally press a button to progress the game.
So hopefully Telltale never deteriorates, or sinks to that level. Yes.
To that level.
Because otherwise, it's like, well, how the mighty have fallen.
Yeah. But there's always room for improvement, though. And that's kind of what I saw with that After Dawn or After Dark.
Until Dawn, a.k.a. Friday the 13th for the 21st century.
Basically, yeah. As predictable as it was and how absurd it was in the last half, it had a pretty good start. But, some of the choices are actually have weight. And at the end, you get this little thing where like all the characters are talking about certain characters that either died or what happened, and they're like in like a police interrogation is what it looks like. I think doesn't Telltale Games do the same thing with Game of Thrones?
This sort of does. I'm not gonna spoil much, but they've done something that they had never done before, where there's a nice little like custom credits sequence that actually lists everything you do. All the major decisions you make from episode 1 to episode 6, and it's narrated by the characters from the TV series, so you actually get to feel like what you did have an effect on Westeros and all these characters. So as a spin-off game, the Game of Thrones game has accomplished what it set out to do. It made you feel like you were actually a part of the larger Game of Thrones continuity, which is great, but in the case of Borderlands, didn't really do anything. But what I was gonna say is, even though I wasn't particularly impressed by Until Dawn, mainly because of the second part, which goes full, the hackneyed '90s supernatural slasher movie territory.
Yeah,
it might as well be one of the lesser episodes of the Supernatural TV series.
Yeah, or X-Files.
Or X-Files, yes. But in a way, I'm actually glad that Telltale is getting competition. Because if there are going to be other companies who are going to outdo them in the whole interactive storytelling department, then that might actually give them a much needed kick up the ass.
Yes. To
tighten up their game, because right now they are pretty...
And to stay kings on the hill, too.
Yeah, because right now they pretty much, for the most part, have a monopoly on the whole interactive storytelling, episodic, choose-your-own-adventure game genre, right? But if there are some new kids on the block who are
trying to steal the crown,
yeah, they might have to go on the defensive and actually go back to that The Walking Dead season 1 and 2 / The Wolf Among Us formula, where it's like a happy medium between an interactive story, a great interactive story, but also a point-and-click exploration game.
Yep. That's free marketing principles, bitches. You either evolve or you die.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of making decisions, I choose to stop this recording right about now.